Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Geb here. So today I want to talk to you guys about a game that is very near and dear to my heart. A game that I believe revolutionized the entire industry, and a game that really needs no introduction. Even though I'm kind of giving it one. It's Halo Combat Evolved. Now, while it is true that I was a PlayStation and Nintendo kid growing up, so I never actually owned this game, I still played a ton of Halos 1, 2, and 3, thanks to some friends at the time that were always down for some multiplayer shenanigans or couch co-op. Like a lot of you guys watching this video, I have so many fond memories of playing through the campaigns, as well as delving heavily into the multiplayer, especially with Halo 3 when online play was a lot more commonplace. Honestly, the run between Halo Combat Evolved all the way to Halo Reach was an absolutely insane time for gaming. Bungie just seemed to keep adding more and innovating on every single new release. Because of this, Halo was a household name, and it created one of the biggest hot topics in gaming at the time of which FPS you were going to side with, Call of Duty or Halo. This was seen as the killer app for Xbox, and not only was it largely responsible for the success of Microsoft in the console market, but for console first-person shooters as well. Audiences and critics loved it, the game was selling like crazy, and Halo was seen not only as a juggernaut in the gaming industry, but also poised to be a multimedia franchise. Man, those were the fucking days, right? It's no secret. Nowadays, Halo is pretty much a shell of its former self. And while it's easy to point the finger at developer 343 and say that their new games don't understand what made Halo so popular in the first place and that they fucking suck, that's the low-hanging fruit here, and it's also not the entire reason. Xbox has moved on to spotlighting other gaming franchises. Bungie left the franchise and now has their hands tied with Destiny and the soon-to-be Marathon. More on that game in a second. And honestly, gamers' tastes have just changed from more traditional arena shooters of yesteryear in favor of more modern trends, for better or for worse. But Halo's beginnings were actually quite humble, and they can even be traced back to early as the mid-90s. See, Bungie at the time were fresh off their second title in their Marathon series, another sci-fi shooter. Being a bit indecisive with where to take the franchise next, Bungie would actually begin concepting new ideas with some of the Marathon DNA, as well as taking inspiration from Quake for their next sci-fi endeavor. But it was mostly kept on the back burner for a later point. Well, elsewhere in Bungie, there was another team working on a vehicular-style tank combat game codenamed, and I'm not kidding here, the Giant Bloody War game. Conceptual names for games are definitely something, that's for sure. My favorite of these being Crash Bandicoot's working title, Sonic's Ass Game, which I wouldn't look up given the age we live in now, but moving on. The Giant Bloody War game unfortunately never came to fruition, and this eventually led Bungie working on the Myth franchise, a series of fantasy-style RTS games. After the release of Myth, Bungie started concepting another RTS game, but this time with some sci-fi elements that they kept from back when Marathon was finished. It's almost like Bungie came home for dinner but forgot to stop at the New Idea grocery store, so they had to take the leftover ingredients to make something new. So a little sci-fi RTS under the codename Armor began development. Of course, the name Armor wouldn't stick, and they would eventually change it to, oh god, Monkey Nuts. Yes, that's what they actually called it, shut up. And then eventually Blam, as if that choice was much better. During the development of this new title, they eventually implemented a mechanic where the player could get up close in third-person view of their units, which got Bungie thinking that, hey, this might actually be a little bit more fun as an action-styled game rather than RTS, which caused the game to transition into a third-person shooter. So Blam, as it was known at the time, would eventually be shown off to Steve Jobs of all people. He was actually super impressed by the game too, and agreed to show the title off at 1999 Macworld Conference and Expo. Days before the Expo, there was still no real title for the game. One of the ideas thrown around was Covenant, which we can see Bungie eventually repurposing for a different use, but the title was ultimately decided upon to be Halo. Bungie thought that this title really captured the feeling of what they wanted to express in their universe, regardless of some Bungie employees' issues with it sounding like it has some religious connotations, or it was the name of a women's shampoo brand. During the Macworld Expo, Halo was announced to be launching simultaneously on Windows and Mac OS in the future. Showing off the game, it actually looks quite a bit different than today, with the humans crash landing on the Covenant world to do battle with the hostile alien life using guerrilla tactics. The game was initially open world with terrain that could be affected by the player, had a variable weather system, and persistent environmental changes such as spent shells from fired weapons. Obviously none of this really stuck though, but it was a really remarkable thing to see Bungie attempt to do all this stuff way back in the late 90s. Behind the scenes, the late 90s were a fucking rough time to be working at Bungie. Marathon and Myth, while not bad games, were certainly no blockbuster hits either. And with a recall of 200,000 copies of Myth 2 thanks to a glitch that would delete everything off of the system registry it was installed on, Bungie found themselves $800,000 in the hole. This eventually led to Bungie selling a significant portion of its shares to Take-Two Interactive. But then in comes Daddy Bill Gates and Microsoft, who Bungie reached out to in order to see if they were interested in an acquisition. With the Microsoft game division ramping up for the launch of their brand new Xbox console, Microsoft agreed to acquire Bungie and the Halo IP, and the rush began to see Halo become a launch title for the original Xbox. This is where more of the development challenges began to ramp up. The goal? Compile all the loose gameplay and story elements together in a package that could launch on the Xbox console in less than a year. Every employee that was working on different projects at Bungie were all consolidated to only work on Halo, and even then, a lot of significant changes needed to be made. First off, the game needed to work on the Xbox controller. And at the time, the only console FPS games were shoddy PC ports or developed for a system that thought everyone was playing their controllers with 3 hands. There was a lot of development time allocated for just the aim assist and camera controls for that area alone. There was also some significant downscaling of the game's scope. The open world was removed in favor of having a linear style of progression, and even then a number of level assets and in some cases entire missions were reused in order to save time on development. Some levels were flat out removed in favor of expository cutscenes. Hell, the plot went through several rewrites in the months leading up to release, and even the multiplayer was another huge mess. 4 months before the game even shipped, Bungie decided the multiplayer wasn't fun and needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. 4 months! Holy shit, this game's development was a fucking mess, and what did Bungie really have to show for it? Just one of the greatest and most successful FPS franchises of all time. Not too bad. Halo Combat Evolved launched in November of 2001 to the original Xbox, with the PC release in September of 2003. To call this game a success would be an understatement. Halo Combat Evolved was a landmark title. Critics gave it absolute universal acclaim, it sold over 4.2 million copies, and audiences couldn't get enough. The impact that Halo CE had goes beyond the game itself. It was largely responsible for the Xbox console and brand to even exist in the gaming space. It launched a newfound interest in FPS games on console and coined the terms such as Halo Clone and Halo Killer for those titles whose whole mission statement was to be the next Halo. Hell, it even provided the backdrop for the machinima genre of animation with the success of Red vs. Blue. There's only a small handful of games in history that can say that they had the impact that Halo CE has. And today, I want to talk to you guys about my personal experience with it. And just a fair warning for you guys, I'm mainly going to be looking at what experience is available on the Halo Master Chief Collection today, because that is the way most people are experiencing this game nowadays, and I just think it's the de facto way to play it personally. So let's see what this game did despite everything it had going against it to make it such a landmark achievement. How does this game hold up 20 years later? And what has made fans so passionate about Halo? Well, let's talk about Halo Combat Evolved. Alright, so Halo Combat Evolved starts with the UNSC ship, the Pillars of Autumn, re-entering from slip space after engaging in a battle with the Covenant. Okay, maybe some context there for people that aren't super well versed on Halo lore. See, the setting for Halo takes place during the 26th century after humanity has discovered faster than light travel, called entering slip space, and began colonizing other planets outside of Earth. The United Nations Space Command, or UNSC for short, were developing augmented super soldiers called Spartans at this time as well. Well, about 20 years before the events of the game, an advanced alien race called the Covenant began a holy war with the human race, citing them as to be a blasphemy to their gods. With the help of the Spartan soldiers, the humans put up a valiant fight, but still get the absolute floor mopped with them thanks to the Covenant's superior numbers and advanced technology. This all culminates on the interstellar hub planet Reach being attacked, with the ship called the Pillars of Autumn escaping to distract the Covenant from attacking Earth. This is where we take control of our protagonist, Petty Officer John 117, better known as the Master Chief.
He's hot!
Now Master Chief, he's one bad motherfucker, and that's a fact that this game is going to remind you of time and time again. He's always confident, doesn't say much, but when he does, it's always something that's badass and heroic. In fact, let me go over some of the other main characters while I'm here. Next up is Cortana, a UNSC artificial intelligence that we carry with us throughout our journey that isn't afraid to get a little sassy when the situation calls for it. Then we have Jacob Keyes, the captain of the Pillars of Autumn, a guy who puts the safety of Earth above even his own, and the one who ultimately provides us with direction. Finally, there is Sergeant Avery Johnson, a soldier in the UNSC that could be a little eccentric and over the top, but is ultimately a strong ally and a good friend of Master Chief. These characters are all written exactly like how you think they would be. When Master Chief speaks, he literally says the coolest and most quotable line depending on what the situation is. Cortana is always ready to add some extra spicy sassiness at the end of her exchanges, and Sergeant Johnson is always spouting out the most inspirational speeches he can at any given time and talking about how he wants to destroy the Covenant. What I love about this game is that all of these characters are written in universe as being completely serious, however the game itself still does a good job of not taking things too seriously. Like some of the things that Master Chief said could have been said by Bruce Willis in Die Hard or Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator, and no one would have batted an eye. It's got a very similar vibe to those classic action movies, and I honestly just love the characterization and writing of everyone here because of that. I think this is a lost art in a lot of modern gaming, as when it comes to the writing for a lot of recent titles, I feel like most either take themselves way too seriously, which either makes them lack an identity, or they take the Joss Whedon style approach and toss in as many quips as possible to varying degrees of success. But playing through this campaign again really brought me back to the days of Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, and God of War, where everything was fun for the player outside of the game, regardless of how seriously it was played for in universe. Getting back on track, the first mission of the game, The Pillars of Autumn, serves as not only an excellent introduction to all the characters, but also many of the gameplay elements that CE wants to introduce. As Master Chief, you'll learn how to use your weapons, grenades, and how to fight different enemies, and his movement capabilities, which I'll go into a little bit more detail during the gameplay section of this video. This is also where all the characters interact with one another, as Chief learns that in order to keep the Covenant away from Earth, he is going to have to look after Cortana and keep her safe as he escapes the Pillars of Autumn on an escape pod to a strange ring-shaped planet close by. Upon landing on the planet, Master Chief and Cortana immediately begin to search for other Marines and just... damn, look at that skybox. And damn, listen to that music. Alright, one more sidebar discussion before I get into the nitty-gritty of this game's story. I promise. Or, hell, maybe I'll just go ahead and start the It's Gab ADHD review series. I don't know. But anyways, Halo Combat Evolved, when it comes to the audio and visual department, is an absolute masterclass in game design, and it still holds up to this day. The Pillars of Autumn already introduced us to the tight alien-esque corridors and the colorful and interesting designs of the Covenant, but landing on the Halo ring for the first time, seeing all of these colors pop, looking out over the wide open space and hearing that fucking music, this is Halo, man, and there isn't anything like it. Think about what it must have looked like back in 2001 when one of the largest open spaces most people had experienced in a video game was Hyrule Field from Ocarina of Time. Like, look how vertical some of these areas are. Look how massive these levels can be, and look at the variety in environments. What I especially love is how you can change the remastered graphics and the soundtrack back to the originals in the MCC, all with the press of a button. I think this is an awesome compromise in order to decide if you want the atmosphere of the original game, or have the art be updated to keep in line with the more modern titles. It's just absolutely superb. Alright, so Master Chief and Cortana save a number of Marines on the planet's surface. Along the way, they learn that Captain Keyes has been captured by the Covenant, and is currently being held aboard one of their cruisers. After rescuing the captain, he then reveals that the Covenant called this planet Halo, and he believes that they are using it as some sort of weapon. Captain Keyes begins to look for weapon caches in order to aid in the fight, while Chief and Cortana head to the control center of the Halo ring, only to have Cortana find out some troubling information. What is that information, that you ask?
There's no time. Get out of here, find Keyes, stop him.
Well, I guess we're gonna have to find that out later. This causes a mad dash to find Captain Keyes in order to warn him to cease his search about what really resides inside of the Halo ring. This is where the twist of the game comes into play, and it really is a memorable moment. As Chief is looking for Keyes, he stumbles upon a bunker that has mutilated Marines all over the place, with strangely empty magazines and all the discarded weapons. And then you open this door and this Marine tries to shoot you. Like, what's going on here? The environmental storytelling in this level does a great job of slowly building up the anticipation to the big payoff. Master Chief checks the headcam footage from one of the deceased Marines and sees exactly what the hell happened here. The Flood. A parasitic entity that kills and takes over the host body in order to spread. attacks all the Marines, and now you have to fight what's left of them. This is a really fucking cool twist, and almost starts to add some survival horror elements to this game. Upon releasing the Flood's caretaker, 343 Guilty Spark, he introduces himself to Master Chief and requests his aid in order to stop the Flood. So we travel through the library. We'll talk about that. In order to get the index to activate the Halo ring. After being transported back to Halo's control room, we are about to activate the ring before Cortana stops us. It is then revealed that by activating the Halo ring, you can in fact stop the Flood. However, this comes at the cost of annihilating all life in the galaxy, so they have no way to spread further. Oops. Well, Guilty Spark, now realizing that leaving that little detail out may have pissed off Chief, attacks the two and then makes a getaway. It's at this point all hell breaks loose, as the Covenant, the Flood, and Halo's defense systems are all at war with one another, and Master Chief and Cortana are stuck in the middle. The solution? Blow up the Halo ring and everything along with it. So they head back to Captain Keyes to find he's been completely assimilated by the Flood. Tragic, but hey, the captain did owe us $20, yoink. Chief and Cortana head back to the Autumn in order to activate his self-destruct sequence to destroy the ring once and for all. But Guilty Spark comes to stop us only momentarily before we blow up the ship by overloading its reactors. And after one cool Warthog escape sequence, we make our way off of the Halo ring with our mission complete.
No, I think we're just getting started.
Yeah, just total action movie vibes. So concludes Halo Combat's evolved story, and I have to say it stands as one of my favorite shooter campaigns out there. I think the characters are all super entertaining, the world that Bungie created is incredibly interesting, and that twist is such an excellent way of raising the stakes that I couldn't wait to see what would come with the series next. I didn't know. Now, while Halo CE's story holds up pretty well, how is the gameplay? No, I think the gameplay is still good for the most part. This is one area where you can really start to feel CE's age. Not to say that it's bad or anything, I still think it's a pretty fun time. However, with later entries in the series and more modern games, you really start to see some of the more archaic design decisions that went on during CE's development. Let's start with one of the most interesting and honestly biggest gameplay innovations for Halo CE, and that is the design being centered around the use of the Xbox controller. See, back in the day, there were hardly any FPS games played with a controller outside of your GoldenEyes, Perfect Darks, and Turoks. And even then, they all had these very strange control schemes that made playing them rather clunky by modern standards. Now, Halo Combat Evolved wasn't the first game to come up with the dual analog style of play for shooters, with the use of the left and right to move your character and camera respectively, but you better be damn sure that after this game came out, nearly every console shooter started adopting this model. There's some weird button quirks, no doubt, like using the right bumper to reload, like, what the fuck is that? But you always have the option of remapping your button layouts in the options menus, so you can make it a pretty comfortable experience. The big reason that I prefer controller to keyboard and mouse with this game is due to the absolute insane boost that the aim assist gives you. See, Halo's time to kill is actually pretty high due to the fact you have to shred through shields, and some enemies have a large health pool beyond that. So landing a lot of shots consistently is incredibly important. And while the keyboard and mouse options are usable and fine, being able to just have this giant area in the center of the screen that tracks enemies just comes out on top with how long gunfights are and how often enemies are jumping around. The combat for Halo CE is honestly pretty simple to explain. Master Chief has two weapons that he starts with or picks up off of the ground. He has grenades of different types, can melee, has an incredibly floaty jump to help dodge attacks, and is able to pick up power-ups such as an overshield to increase his defenses, or a cloak to become stealthy. If Chief takes too much damage, his shield depletes, leaving him vulnerable, which you will have to hide and wait for it to recharge. Now, in terms of the arsenal that Master Chief has to play around with, there are an absolute ton of options, and I think they're mostly all fun. The weapons are divided into the UNSC and Covenant use, but Chief can use either of them as he likes, though I do think the UNSC weapons are the better picks overall. It might have something to do with most UNSC weapons being hit scanned while the Covenant weapons are projectiles, but I also find most of the Covenant weapons to just be pretty weak even if you do manage to hit. First, let's get the big one out of the way. The CE pistol is absolutely busted, and you can basically win any encounter with little difficulty by pulling this thing out. It has insanely high damage, accuracy, is able to zoom in, reloads quickly, has a cool as fuck animation when you melee with it. What's not to love? Next is the assault rifle, which is a total waste of time, don't use it. Kidding, it's okay. But with how great the pistol is, you really have to wonder why they made this thing so inferior in nearly every way. Next is the shotgun, my personal favorite weapon for taking down the Flood given its raw damage and spread. Next is the sniper, which I really have a ton of fun getting headshots with, especially in the multiplayer. After that is the rocket launcher for whenever you want to destroy anything in a general area. And last but not least, the flamethrower, which is a multiplayer exclusive weapon, which I think is okay if a little unwieldy. Not sure why it has the Bape logo on it though. More like Master Chief Keef, am I right? When it comes to the Covenant weapons, the standout has to be the plasma pistol. You are able to charge this thing up and completely deplete the shields of the target that you hit with it, making them very easy to take down with a pistol. Plus, the shots have slight homing properties, which easily makes it the best Covenant choice in the game. Outside of that, we also have the plasma rifle, which I like more than the assault rifle, but I feel like there's almost always a better option available. Then there's the Needler, which I think has a cool as fuck design, but isn't super great because of the necessity to land a certain number of shots to trigger an explosion. And with how easy it is to move away from these shots, I think you're better off finding something else. Lastly, there's the fuel rod, which, I mean, how would you like your rocket launcher to arc more and have less damage? Yeah, I didn't like this one either. Outside of weapons, Chief is also able to commandeer a number of vehicles. There's the Warthog that comes with both an LMG and rocket launcher variant. These things are so much fun to drive. Like, they kind of control like ass, but it's some ass you can get used to. Why did I say it like that? The Scorpion tank provides some heavy firepower, with the caveat that you are exposed in the cockpit for some reason. It can easily be shot out. Kind of goes against the idea of being in a tank, but hey, fair enough. The Ghost provides a motorcycle-like hovering vehicle that has blasters on the front, and might be the most fun solo vehicle to have. And finally, there are the Banshees, who can take to the skies and pretty much only kill other Banshees. Yeah, I didn't think these things were too great for combat. They're not bad for traversal, but I really didn't get too many kills with these things. Funnily enough, you can't really destroy most of these vehicles either, which can honestly make for some pretty hilarious situations. With all that being said, you're going to need all the resources you can get, because between the Covenant, Flood, and Sentinels, Master Chief has his work cut out for him. First on the Covenant side, you have the Grunts, which can cause some damage when in numbers, but are mostly harmless when alone. Also, I love the little pieces of dialogue they have whenever you're fighting them. It's usually some really funny shit, especially when you catch one with a plasma grenade. Next are the Jackals, which are similar to the Grunts, except they carry around energy shields, requiring some better accuracy. Following that are the Elites, much more dangerous members of the Covenant that have energy shields like Master Chief, and a large pool of health to boot. Some even carry energy cloaks and stealth cloaks, which can be very scary during the higher difficulties. Lastly, on the Covenant side are the Hunters, large armored aliens who prefer melee attacks and can even deflect a lot of the energy-based weapons. On the Flood side of things, we have the Infection forms, which are basically cannon fodder, but also come in very large numbers. There are the Carrier forms, which explode upon death, releasing tons of the Infection forms. The combat forms are the ones you really have to look out for though. These guys will swarm you with melee attacks, and some even have weapons such as shotguns or even rocket launchers, which, fuck those guys by the way. Lastly, there are the Halo Sentinels that float around and fire laser beams that do massive shield damage. The enemy design in this game was revolutionary at the time due to the game's emphasis on artificial intelligence. This is primarily seen on the Covenant enemies because they will do things such as actively dodge grenades or vehicles, take cover. The Grunts will even freak out if an elite is killed near them, and I think this is a very immersive touch. All of these different factions are at war with each other, as well as Master Chief, so there are plenty of instances where you may even just want to sit back and let things play out before making your move. There are even some instances where some of the UNSC Marines accompany you in submissions in order to even the odds. They are mostly useless, but they add another layer to each encounter, making the game even more unique. And housing these encounters in the campaign missions is the level design, which I mostly like, but there are some things I do take issue with. This might actually be my biggest complaint when it comes to Halo Combat Evolved, and that is its repetitive level design, especially in the last third of the game. In the earlier levels, it's no secret that a lot of hallways and a ton of rooms get used over and over again, and while I think the game does a mostly good job of creating different encounters in these locations, it is something that starts to become more and more noticeable the longer you play. This comes to the forefront at the most infamous level in CE's campaign, the library. A 15 to 20 minute long slog through the same hallways, up the same elevators, all while being hounded by the Flood. God, please shoot me. It's not necessarily hard, and I get that the tone that they were going for with this mission was to be oppressive, but I am either bored or frustrated by the second floor, and there really is no changing that. The levels after that are just going through some of the previously explored areas backwards, with occasional visual differences or small new areas to explore here or there, which is honestly a pretty big letdown, especially with how strong the beginning of the campaign was. Add on to the fact that the checkpoint system for some of these levels can be rather brutal, causing the player to be set back several minutes at a time for a minor mistake. I get it, a lot of stuff had to be changed due to Halo's development. Disk space was very limited at the time, and if they cut out these levels in Halo's campaign, it would only be about 4 hours or so. I'm not saying that I think these levels should be removed, In fact, given the circumstance, what we have is still rather impressive. I just can't help but feel it could have been a little bit better if the circumstances were right for Bungie at the time. It's not all bad though, there are plenty of things to enjoy about what's here. Firstly, I love how open-ended most of the levels are. Not necessarily in terms of non-linearity, but just how much shit you can do and get away with while still completing your end goal. Something that I noticed with this game is that Bungie never really tells the player no when it comes to Halo. If you want to try to steal a Banshee in the first mission, you can. If you want to kill all the Marines to steal their weapons, you can. If you want to drive a Warthog inside of a door that should definitely not be able to fit it, you bet your ass you can. The openness in this level design encourages players to try new things and push the physics engine to its limits to see what goofy possibilities they can come up with. Speaking of goofy shit, let's talk about possibly the best part about CE's campaign. You can experience the entire thing with a friend. There's no doubt in my mind that this got a number of people interested in the series in the first place. I can attest to this one personally. Being able to play the entire campaign together, getting your Warthog into dumbass places, having a fight club on the elevators, or fucking around with the weird rubber banding checkpoint systems is such a fun experience to share with someone. You were capable of split-screen co-op back on the original version of CE, but now thanks to the MCC, you can experience this whole thing online. Hell, you can even make playlists of your favorite missions and skip the bad ones altogether. They even put skulls in this version of the games for those who want an extra challenge. Speaking of extra challenges, I can't recommend playing this game enough on different difficulties. The harder difficulties change some things like you would expect, such as weapon damage, health, and enemy durability, but also the AI gets improved and some new enemies actually come and show up in different places to raise the stakes. Add on playing this with some more of the tricky skulls, and you and a buddy have a recipe for a very challenging time, but something that I think provides an excellent capstone when finishing Halo Combat Evolved's campaign. So while I think Halo Combat Evolved's campaign is mostly a great time, I can't 100% say the same thing for the multiplayer. I'm not saying that the game's multiplayer is bad. There's still a lot of fun to be had. However, I think it's a pretty safe thing to say that nearly every other Halo game has come out after CE has innovated and improved on this formula in some way that makes going back to CE's multiplayer a little bit challenging. Again, I'll be looking at how the MCC handles the CE portion of its multiplayer components, and with that in mind, let me start by saying the MCC is by far the best way to experience what the Halo series has to offer. Yeah, just get that out of here. You're able to customize your Spartan across a number of games, and can even create your own playlist to log into a number of matches from any of the games or modes that the MCC provides. So let's start with looking at some of the positive of Halo CE's multiplayer. First, there are a bunch of different modes to play in this game. Let's look at the 4v4 and 2v2 modes first. You of course have Slayer, that is essentially Team Deathmatch. You have Capture the Flag, where the flag carrier will have no active weapon, which is really fun. Oddball, which is an absolute blast with players taking turns holding the ball in order to accrue points over time. And lastly, we have King of the Hill, a mode where each team gathers points by standing in a predetermined destination and guarding it from the enemy team. What's great about this is that each of these modes also has variants that switch up things to make these modes even more fresh. Fiesta to give everyone random weapons, modes that give people nothing but launchers or snipers, or even hardcore modes that get rid of the shields and the HUD. And don't even get me started on Big Team Battle. Now this is the real shit right here. Getting two of your friends to go on an assault with a Warthog, sniping from the mountains from far away, using a Scorpion tank to spawn camp the enemy team so your buddies can steal the flag. God, it's all so awesome. It speaks volumes that Halo CE on the Master Chief Collection still feels like it has more to do than Halo Infinite. Now, I do think there's a lot of fun to be had with CE's multiplayer. It doesn't come without a number of issues that I will say did have an impact on the overall experience. Firstly, let's talk about the map design. So the Big Team Battle maps I think are mostly fine. They offer enough space to ensure both sides are balanced, and it can be somewhat difficult to spawn camp. There are a ton of fun maps in here, with Blood Gulch being my personal favorite, but I also have some love for the maps that have some really out there designs like Danger Canyon and Jeffrophobia.
Geophoria.
Yeah, that. The 4v4 maps though, not great. Some are fine depending on the mode, like I think Chill Out and Longest are pretty solid, but some of the other maps can just be too one-sided. They have a number of problems from either being too small and being constantly spawn camped like in Wizard and Derelict, they're too imbalanced to one side like Rat Race or Hang 'em High, or they're too vertical like Damnation or Prisoner. And who the fuck wanted to make a map about Battle Creek? But man, some games you play on these, you can't help but feel if these maps were a little bit better designed, you'd have a much more balanced and fun gameplay experience. The only other real complaint I have is the way that MCC handles its matchmaking. So lobbies are created in between games, and with no option to have a player be slotted into an ongoing game that had a player leave. Now, I have to ask, why? It's not like there's any match progression, and I get not allowing it for competitive games, but why not in the casual playlist? Even worse, if you try to leave a casual game, you immediately get a timeout. Like again, in a competitive playlist that makes sense, but with casual it just seems really dumb. Even more so when you factor in if you accidentally kill your teammate enough times, you'll get auto-kicked. Which is pretty easy to avoid in 4v4, but for big team battle, when you can get kicked for accidentally bumping your teammate in a vehicle, it's really annoying. Because of all these things, it can sometimes take an unreasonably long time to queue up for anything that isn't a 4v4 standard team slayer, which is a damn shame because I truly believe there's an obvious solution right there, so you have to wonder why it is the way it is. Don't get me wrong, I still think Halo Combat Evolved's multiplayer is still good, but it really is held back by some archaic design decisions, imbalanced map design, and several secrets that are more popular with the community that people would rather be playing. I would still recommend the multiplayer because I believe it can be fun with friends, but don't go into this expecting a completely balanced experience. Halo Combat Evolved is a game that not only started a massive multimedia franchise, but also revolutionized console FPS, put the Xbox brand on the map, and created a massive community that is still dedicated to this day. The game has an absolute stellar campaign, a fun addicting multiplayer, and best-in-class audio and visual design. However, there are a couple things that hold Halo CE back due to its age and the toll development took on the title. There are tons of reused assets and pieces of level design in the campaign, the multiplayer is unbalanced, and there are a host of ideas that never came to fruition. Regardless of that though, I do believe that Halo Combat Evolved is a timeless classic and is something that gets my wholehearted recommendation. It may have a few rough spots, but I believe that is an experience anyone who is interested in the medium needs to play at least once in their life.
Punch it.
God, Chief is such a fucking badass. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for watching. What were your favorite memories of Halo Combat Evolved? Please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. Thank you guys again, and I'll catch you in the next video.